Hi, I'm Reva with Quality Sewing and Vacuum, and I organize the special events for our company, and I'm really excited to share with you some information on needles and threads, and probably the top 10 notions that you really want to have in your sewing room. So let's start with some needles, and before we talk about specific types of needles, I want to show you a little bit about the anatomy of a needle. So on this needle, this is obviously not a real one, but every needle for a home sewing machine that we use today has a similar, it all has the same shape. So we have this top part here. This is the part that goes up into the sewing machine. And one side is flat, and that's gonna go away from you when you put your needle in. And this is called the shank. Then we have the shaft of the needle that comes down here, and there's a groove down in the front of the needle that will it's a pathway for the thread to go down and be able to go into the eye of the needle. And the eye obviously is the hole down here. And that groove is the opposite side of the flat side. So that's why the flat goes to the back, because you need the thread to be on the front. So we have the eye here, we have the tip down below the eye, and then of course the point is the very, very bottom of that. Now on the back side of the needle, there is a divot that's cut out, and that's called the scarf. And this is cut out on purpose because when your needle thread from the sewing needle goes down into the machine and the bobbin picks up that thread, it can only do so with the fact that there's a scarf here. Now the reason why I'm telling you all this is because not all needles are created equal. They may have the general parts, but they're shaped differently. And you're gonna get different results depending on which needle you're using. So if you're ever getting skip stitches and the fabric's bunching up, don't be mad at your machine the first time out, because it very well might be that you don't have the right needle in for the job. So let's talk about a couple of different types of needles. So when you get your machine, you're probably going to get a pack of needles inside the machine. And in this is usually a universal. Now there's all different brands of needle types, and there's all different types of needles. So we're going to talk first about the universal needle. This is a needle that has a tip shape that isn't really totally sharp, but it's not rounded either down at the very bottom. And that is so that way it can accommodate many different types of fabrics and different types of sewing situations. So a universal is a good overall go-to kind of a needle. Now, it's okay to use your universals, but once you start getting into more projects and you're working with things that are more specialized, then you might want to choose a needle that is specific for the fabric that you're going to be working with. So there's different fabrics. So for example, you may want to work on a knit like a t-shirt or a sweatshirt, and then you would use a ballpoint. A ballpoint has a rounded tip to it, and that is so that way when the needle goes into the fabric, then the fabric is not cut by the sharpness of a needle that has a sharp point. So that's the ballpoint. And then we have a sharp. A sharp has a very sharp point, and that is great for tightly woven fabrics, quilting cottons, home deck fabric, things like that, you know, that are tightly woven. So the universal needle is kind of in between the sharp and the ballpoint. So that is that size of needle or type of needle. Now let's talk about the sizing. There's two different ways to size a needle, and that there's a European number and then there's also an American number. And they range in size. So a standard needle that you're going to get probably in your machine is a size 90-14. So that is, the European is the 90 and the 14 is the American numbers on that. And those numbers go up as the needle gets bigger, and they go smaller when the needle gets more fine. And so if you're working with a really fine silk or something like that, you might want an 860. Or if you're working with really heavy canvas and things like that, you might want to do a 19-120. So it just depends on the fabric weight. Now there are other types of needles that you might be interested in, and that all has to do with either the thread or the type of fabric. So we have here a denim needle. Sometimes they're called a jeans needle, but it's a denim needle. This is made specifically to work on really heavy, tightly woven fabrics like the old-fashioned style denim. So if you're working with canvas or an old type of jeans, not the kind now that have all the stretch and they're soft and that sort of thing, but that's what the jeans denim needle is for. It has a shaft that is more strong and it will hold up better to the thickness of the fabrics. It also has a larger eye, assuming that you're using a heavier thread. Then we have a stretch needle. Now stretch is not the same as a ballpoint. A stretch needle is actually made for knit fabrics that have lycra and things like that in it. So this needle works best on that kind of fabric. It also has a different shape to the scarf. And if you remember, the scarf is the back side. So using a regular needle or a ballpoint needle with a lycra or a spandex fabric, you might get skip stitches or bunching because maybe the scarf isn't proper. So try a stretch needle for that. Then we also have quilting needles. Now quilting needles are great because they have a stronger shaft on them to accommodate the different layers. When you're quilting, you go through seams and all sorts of things. So it has a very sharp point, but that extra strong shaft so it can go through the different layers of fabric very, very easily. It's also great for piecing because you're going to get a more consistent stitch because it has a nice sharp point and it's gonna go exactly where it needs to go and go through all those layers very beautifully. A top stitch needle is fabulous because it has a bigger eye to accommodate those heavyweight threads we use when we do top stitching. So this is something that you might like to have in your library of needles. And then we have a leather needle. This is fabulous for working on things like, well, obviously leather, but vinyls and even, you could even use it on cork if you want to. What makes this different is that it has a wedge-shaped tip to it. So that way when it pokes the hole through the leather or the vinyl, it doesn't have a spot that can make the leather tear. It actually chisels out a hole. So that's what this one is for. And then we have embroidery needles. Now embroidery needles have nice big eyes, so that way the thicker embroidery thread can smoothly go in and out of that needle the many times that it needs to before it gets put into the project without having the thread fray or shred on you. And then a metallic needle is very similar to an embroidery needle, but it is designed to work with metallic threads. So those are just some basic things. Now, when you go to one of our stores at QualitySewing.com, you're going to find we have different brands of needles, but we only carry high quality needles. So for example, when you get one of the Class A needles, you're going to find that there's information that you can get. Do you want me? I'll stop. So when you come into one of our stores at Quality Sewing, you're gonna find that we have lots of different needles, different brands, but we only carry good quality. Be cautious of things that sound like they're too good of a deal because there's probably a reason why they're too good of a deal. So when you get our needles, of course, we're happy to help you there in the store if you have any questions. But if you take a look at the display for the Class A needles, it will give you information about what those different needles do. And we're happy to help you figure out the right needle for your project. So if you start with a universal, that's a great place to start, but just know that there's lots of different needles for different jobs. And if you're not getting the results that you think you should be getting from your machine, it may not be a machine issue. It might be as simple as a needle. Now, when you're working with your needles, it is good to change your needle after 8 hours of sewing. And that's the cheapest line of defense on maintaining the health of your machine is by putting in a new needle every 8 hours. And what that's going to do is make sure that you have a fresh, good working device in your machine. Because as you use a needle, you can get burrs on the needles that you don't even see. It can have a little bend in it, and all those are things that could actually damage the mechanism of your machine. So it's always good to have a new needle. I like to start out every sewing morning or every day that I start on a project, I like to put a new needle in just to make sure that it's all good to go. So with that, I want to show you one more thing. Needle packets are very, very easy to get into. This one happens to just open up like this. You bend it down and then you have access to the needles. So that's really pretty easy. So again, all you need to do is bend that down and then you have access to the needles. Now other brands are a little bit different, so I'll show you that one, and this is a great Schmetz needle, and I'm just going to take the package off the paper because all the information is right here printed on the package. But how these work to get into the needle, there's a clear piece on top, and then it has the solid colored plastic on the back. So all you need to do is slide the clear plastic down, and that will expose that top, and you just bend that top portion back, and then you have full access to your needle. And it's very, very easy to get a hold of. And then when you want to close it up, you slide that up, and then it just slides and keeps it closed, and they don't fall out. So that's just a really easy way to work with those. Now, let me tell you real quick on the best way to change your needle. So if you want to, you can remove your foot off of your machine. And then you have a little screw right here to the right of the needle area, and that is the screw that holds the needle in. So I'm going to take the needle and I'm going to hold it so the flat part is to the back, and just insert that into that hole. And what you want to do is just make sure that it is all the way up, and then tighten the screw. And it's great if you use a little screwdriver and just get it tight, not really tight, but just tight enough to hold, because it's going in and out of fabric, so you want to make sure that is nice and secure. Okay, so now that we have that down, let's talk a little bit about thread. So there's many different types of threads, and all threads are not created equal. Again, high quality thread is going to give you the best results. If you find something in a dollar bin, pass, right? Because you don't want your sewing experience to be lousy because you're using a product that's going to just give you problems. So use high quality threads. A sewing thread or a construction thread is used for making projects, tote bags, garments, pants, that sort of thing. And it's designed to be strong. It's usually a poly or a polycore that has, some of it maybe has a little bit of a cotton around the outside, but that polyester is extra strong, so that's a good thing to use. Then there's also things like embroidery thread. Now embroidery thread is really pretty, but it's not gonna hold your pants together. So you don't wanna sew with this, because then you go out to dinner, you sit down and you've lost your pants. It's really not a good thing, but it's really pretty. It has a nice shine to it, and so it's good for decorative stitches, top stitching, and embroidery. So that's fun. Then we also have quilting thread, and we also have serger thread, and they look similar because they come in cones, and this happens to be a quilting thread. This is good for doing the quilting and sticking your layers of fabrics together, but it's not what you're going to use to sew your seams. It's very lightweight, and it's pretty. And then serger thread, again, it looks very much like this, but it's not. It's designed to work on a serger where you have multiple threads working together to give it strength. It's not really designed to hold your pants together. So that's the threads there. So now let's talk about some of the basic things that you really need to have on hand in your sewing room. So in addition to needles and threads, you're going to need bobbins. Now, not all bobbins are the same. So you can go to the store and you want to pick up bobbins, that's great, pick up some bobbins, but you got to make sure they're the right ones for your machine. So keep that in mind. And if you have your Aunt Edna's sewing basket and she has a bunch of bobbins in there, probably not going to work on your machine. So you want to check those out. And if you have any questions, come into one of our stores if you're in Western Washington, in the Puget Sound area, and we're happy to let you know if that bobbin is actually a good one for your machine. So do check that out. But in addition to that, so you're going to need some hand sewing needles. I know, we're working with a sewing machine. It seems like you shouldn't have to have them, but you are going to need a good set of assorted hand sewing needles, so that way you can perform those tasks when you need them. A seam ripper is your best friend. Do not be afraid of the seam ripper. It's okay. In fact, if you resign yourself to think that you're going to have to unsew some of the things that you sew, you're going to be much happier, because everyone has to unstitch from time to time. So a seam ripper is great because you can get in there and just get those little stitches out. And I actually like this one a lot because it has this honeycomb kind of looking shape to it, and it has some grip to it. So once you cut those little stitches, you can actually just brush away the little bits of thread. So that's pretty fabulous. You need a good pair of scissors. This is good for cutting fabric. It has the nice flat edge, which allows you to cut out your patterns and have it run across the tabletop here. And get a good pair. You need a pair that cuts beautifully to the tip, and you want them to be comfortable in your hand. So these are a must. And we have these on our website too. These are the Kai scissors. They're my absolute favorites. So you'll find those there. You also need some good pins. Now pins, take a look for some that are nice and sharp, that have a heat resistant head or a glass head on them. So that way you can have them in your project when you're doing pressing, so that way they don't melt to your fabric, because that's not the look you're going for. All right, then you also need a tape measure. This is very, very handy to have. This one's really cute. This is a 60-inch long one, so it's good to have one that's nice and long, but you can also get cute little ones that look like puppy dogs or flowers or all sorts of things. They're just really fun, but they're not as long. So having one that's longer might be a good idea. Okay, so those are some of the basic things that you want to have on hand. So let's talk about some of the things that are a little bit beyond those the necessary ones, the ones that you absolutely have to have. So when we're talking about bobbins, this is an awesome thing. This is called a bobbin saver, and how this works is that your bobbins just fit in here, and as you have them all full and filled up, you can actually see what color thread that you have on them, and it keeps them from unrolling or unwinding, and it keeps it very neat. And there's different styles of those. Then we'll talk about our pins. This thing is pretty cool. Long gone are the pin cushions. Now, I love pin cushions, so you can still get yourself a pin cushion, but this thing's called a Zirkle, and it is a magnetic pin cushion. So when you're using your pins and you're done, you can just simply drop it and it goes right back where it needs to go. And so you don't have to worry about sticking them in a pin cushion. It's also great if you happen to drop some, because then you can like kind of sweep the floor with it and you can get them up, because you know it's no fun when you find a pin on the floor. All right, so then for marking tools, we have some other things that are pretty neat to have. And before I show you this one, let me show you this one right here. This is a water-soluble marking pen. So what it does is when you write, it's blue, and then you can wash it out, or this one happens to have an eraser, so you can then erase the marks off of the fabric. And this is actually should have been over on my top 10. This is a must to have. So other marking tools that are great are the friction pens. These are ballpoint pens that actually disappear with the heat of your iron, and you're going to want to make sure that you test your fabric to make sure that they coexist well, because some fabrics will kind of react with it a little bit. And then we also have like a seam ripper like this, and this is really cool. It has like little teeth, but it can get in there and get those threads away. Then you can have, there's different types of stilettos, and stilettos are awesome because what they do, this one actually stores in itself, and it has a really sharp point to it. So that way it lets you get right close to the needle as you're sewing, so you don't get your finger all under the needle, because that's, again, not a good thing. And one of my favorite things is the Choco Liner pen style chalk marker. It has like a little wheel in here, and then this is loose chalk, and that wheel delivers a nice fine line of chalk for your marking, and then it just brushes away. And if you noticed, these are pretty handy too. We have these stash and stores, and how they work is they have this really neat little pattern in here, and you can just stick your tools right in there, and then you can have it sitting right next to your sewing machine, so you have the tools you need all the time right there. I actually put mine right to the right side of my machine, so I'm ready to go. Now another thing that you might want to do is get yourself an accessory bag. Before I had an area where you could have a dedicated sewing space, I kept my sewing machine in a closet, and I had my sewing room notions in a bag just like this, and everything that I needed was in this bag. So you can have your different style of marking pens. This purple one actually is an air erasable marker. This is great because then you don't have to get it wet to wash it out. But word to the wise, make sure you do your project and use the markings and don't leave it sit for a week because it will be gone. Then that's the point of that type of pen. Then we also have things like this. This is a neat little tool. This is the roll-in press. This is like a little mini iron. So when you're at your machine and you do a seam, you can roll it flat instead of having to get up and go over to your ironing board. So that's very, very useful. We also have a different type of stylus. This is the heat and what is it? The Hold It Precision Stiletto, and it has a silicone tip here, so when you're working with the iron, you can get this really close and it won't melt. And then you also have another really sharp point on the end to be able to maneuver your fabric near your needle. And of course, Wonder Clips, these are awesome. They're quilt clips and they just clip your fabric together, and it's kind of an option to pins. Not that you don't need pins too, you do need pins, but those are pretty neat. But if you have a bag like this, then you can put all your different notions in here. And one thing I really appreciate is that the back pocket is really big, so you can put your sewing machine manual right in here, and so you always have it on hand. And then if you're, one of my favorite things for pressing or ironing, because we do a lot of pressing when we sew, and this is Best Press. It's a starch-free fabric stiffener, so it doesn't have the sugars that starch may have. So if you live in an area where you have moths and things like that, they won't be attracted to this. But it gives your fabric a nice stiff finish, so it is it's really easy to sew, and it really turns out well. So I hope that helps you get your sewing arsenal of supplies ready for your next project. So as you can see, there's lots of different notions that you can have. Some are more necessary than others, so you can build up to that, but they're all designed to make your sewing project and the process of sewing much easier. So if you have the right tools, you're gonna have your job be easier. So thank you for joining us today. I'm really glad to be able to be with you and kind of show you some things that you may need for your sewing area. If you live in Western Washington, come into one of our stores. We'd love to see you there. But if you don't live close, then check us out on our website at qualitysewing.com, and you can even chat with one of our online specialists if you have a question with anything there. So we look forward to meeting up with you, and have a great time sewing.